The morning sun painted everything golden as David Johnson stepped onto his front porch with a steaming cup of coffee. He looked out at the quiet neighborhood street and smiled. After 15 years of teaching high school math, he and his wife, Dr. Lisa, had finally saved enough to buy their dream home in Willowbrook Heights. "Daddy, look what I found." 8-year-old Maya came running from the backyard, her pigtails bouncing. She held up a smooth, round stone that sparkled in the sunlight. "It's like a treasure." David chuckled and bent down to examine his daughter's discovery. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Where did you find it?" "By the big oak tree. Tommy says there might be more buried treasure back there." Maya's eyes sparkled with excitement as she talked about her 12-year-old brother's latest theory. Lisa appeared in the doorway, still wearing her gardening gloves and holding a basket of fresh tomatoes. As a pediatrician at the local children's hospital, she rarely got weekends completely free, but today was special. "No emergencies, no calls, just family time. The garden is coming along beautifully," she announced, setting the basket down. "These tomatoes are going to make the most amazing salsa for tonight's barbecue." David wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders. 3 years ago, when they first walked through this house, it had felt like an impossible dream. The neighborhood was safe, the schools were excellent, and the backyard was perfect for their children to play freely. Now, watching Maya search for more treasure, while Tommy practiced basketball shots against the garage, everything felt exactly right. "Remember when we first looked at this place?" Lisa asked, reading his thoughts. "I was so nervous about the mortgage payments. And now look at us," David replied. "Maya has her own little garden plot. Tommy made the middle school basketball team. And you've got that home office you always wanted." The neighborhood was slowly waking up around them. Mrs. Chen next door was watering her flower beds, and the Patel family across the street was loading up their car for what looked like a day trip. Everyone knew each other here. The kids played together, neighbors helped each other with yard work, and the annual block party was something everyone looked forward to. Tommy jogged over, basketball tucked under his arm. "Dad, can you help me fix that loose board on the fence? I keep losing my ball in the neighbor's yard." "Of course, son. Let me grab my tools." As David headed to the garage, he felt that familiar sense of pride and accomplishment. This wasn't just a house. It was their home. Every monthly payment, every weekend spent painting and fixing things, every small improvement they made was an investment in their family's future. Lisa called out from the kitchen window, "Honey, don't forget we're expecting the delivery truck this morning. The new patio furniture should arrive any minute." "Got it," David replied, pulling out his toolbox. He'd been looking forward to that furniture for weeks. Tonight's barbecue would be the first time they'd really get to show off their completed outdoor space. Maya ran up with another stone, this one even prettier than the first. "Daddy, I think our backyard is magic. Everything here is so beautiful." David smiled and ruffled her hair. Out of the mouths of babes. Their backyard did feel magical. The previous owners had planted fruit trees that were now mature and providing shade. Lisa's vegetable garden was thriving, and the kids' swing set sat perfectly under the old oak tree where Maya had found her treasures. The sound of a truck rumbling down their street caught everyone's attention. "That must be our delivery," Lisa said, walking out to meet them. But as the vehicle got closer, David noticed it wasn't a delivery truck at all. It was a police car, moving slowly down their street as if the officer was looking for something specific. Probably just routine patrol, David thought to himself, turning back to help Tommy with the fence. In their 3 years here, they'd rarely seen police cars in the neighborhood except for the occasional speed check on the main road. The morning was too perfect to worry about anything. The fence repair would take maybe 20 minutes, then they'd set up the new patio furniture, and by evening they'd be hosting their friends for the best barbecue of the summer. Maya had found a third stone and was arranging all 3 in a neat line on the porch steps. "I'm making a treasure museum," she announced proudly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Lisa called out, now back to organizing her tomatoes. "Make sure you save room for the special rocks Tommy found last week." The police car had stopped somewhere down the street, though David wasn't paying much attention. He was focused on explaining to Tommy how to properly use the drill to secure the loose fence board. "See, son, you want to make sure the screw goes in straight, or the board won't sit flush against the post." Tommy nodded seriously, always eager to learn new skills. At 12, he was becoming genuinely helpful with household projects. And David enjoyed these father-son moments working together. The neighborhood continued its peaceful Saturday morning rhythm. Someone was mowing their lawn a few houses down, and the smell of bacon drifted from another neighbor's kitchen. This was exactly the kind of safe, community-oriented environment David and Lisa had dreamed of providing for their children. Little did they know that their perfect morning was about to take a turn that would change everything. The sound of heavy footsteps on their driveway made David look up from the fence repair. A police officer was walking toward them with purpose, his hand resting on his belt in a way that immediately put David on edge. "Excuse me," the officer called out in a stern voice. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge here." David set down his drill and walked over, Tommy following close behind. "Good morning, officer. I'm David Johnson. This is my home. Is there something I can help you with?" Officer Bradley Stevens looked David up and down with obvious suspicion. He was a large man with cold eyes and an expression that suggested he'd already made up his mind about something. "I received a call about suspicious activity at this address. Reports of possible breaking and entering. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," David replied calmly, though his heart was beginning to race. "This is our home. We've lived here for 3 years." Lisa had noticed the conversation and was walking over, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Maya peeked out from behind the porch railing, her treasure stones temporarily forgotten. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back," Officer Stevens said to Lisa before she could even speak. "I'm conducting an investigation here." "Investigation of what?" Lisa asked, confusion clear in her voice. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We live here. This is our house," Stevens scoffed. "Right. And I suppose you have some proof of that?" "Of course we do," David said, reaching for his back pocket. "Let me get my keep your hands where I can see them," Stevens barked, his hand moving closer to his weapon. David immediately raised his hands, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not in their own driveway, not in front of their children. "Officer, please," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. "There's obviously been some kind of mistake. We can show you our identification, our mortgage papers, anything you need." "What I need," Stevens said, his voice dripping with authority, "is for you people to stop making this difficult. I got a call about burglars, and here I find you going through someone else's property like you own the place." Tommy stepped closer to his father, confusion and fear written across his young face. Maya had disappeared entirely behind the porch railing, though David could hear her quiet sniffles. "Officer Stevens," David said, reading the name tag. "I understand you're just doing your job, but I assure you there's been a mistake. This is our home. We can prove it. The only mistake here is thinking you can fool me," Stevens replied. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know suspicious activity when I see it." Mrs. Chen from next door had noticed the commotion and was watching from her front yard, clearly concerned. David caught her eye and tried to signal that everything was okay, but the situation was spiraling out of control fast. "Look," David said, trying a different approach. "Why don't you call your dispatcher and verify the address of the complaint?" "I think you'll find—" "Don't tell me how to do my job," Stevens interrupted. "What I'm going to do is call for backup, because you people are clearly not cooperating with a legitimate police investigation." Lisa's professional training as a doctor kicked in, helping her stay calm under pressure. "Officer, we're happy to cooperate. We just want to understand what's happening. Can you tell us who called in this complaint?" "That's confidential information," Stevens said, pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need backup at 1247 Maple Street. Multiple suspects refusing to comply with investigation." David's stomach dropped. "Suspects refusing to comply?" He looked at his wife, seeing his own disbelief reflected in her eyes. "Officer, please." David tried again. "Can't we just go inside and get our documents? This will all be cleared up in 2 minutes. Nobody's going anywhere until backup arrives," Stevens said firmly. "And I'm going to need all of you to move away from the house." "Move away from our own house?" Lisa asked, her voice rising slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again." The sound of sirens in the distance made David's heart sink even further. This was really happening. In their own driveway, in front of their children, in front of their neighbors, they were being treated like criminals. Tommy tugged on his father's shirt. "Dad, what's happening? Why is the policeman being mean to us?" David knelt down to his son's level, trying to keep his voice calm. "There's just been a misunderstanding, son. We're going to sort it out." But even as he said the words, David could see more neighbors coming out of their houses, drawn by the sirens and the unusual scene. The Patels had returned from their day trip and were staring in shock. Other families were gathering on porches and lawns, some holding phones. "This is ridiculous," Lisa muttered under her breath, but loud enough for Stevens to hear. "What did you say?" he demanded, taking a step toward her. "I said this is ridiculous," Lisa repeated, louder this time. "We're a family standing in our own driveway, and you're treating us like criminals without even checking your facts." Stevens' face darkened. "Lady, you better watch your tone with me. I'm trying to conduct a professional investigation here, and your attitude isn't helping anyone." David stood up and gently placed a hand on Lisa's arm. The last thing they needed was for this situation to escalate further. But he could see the anger and frustration building in his wife's eyes, and honestly, he felt the same way. 3 years of mortgage payments, 3 years of mowing this lawn, 3 years of being part of this community, and somehow they were being treated like they didn't belong here. The backup sirens were getting closer, and David realized their perfect Saturday morning had become something else entirely. Something that would require every ounce of patience and dignity they could muster, not just for themselves, but for their children who were watching and learning how their parents handled injustice. 2 more patrol cars pulled up to the house, their red and blue lights flashing across the quiet neighborhood like something from a crime scene. David felt his stomach turn as he watched his neighbors' faces change from curiosity to shock. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the first backup car, followed by Officer Kim from the second vehicle. Both looked confused as they approached Stevens, clearly not seeing any signs of the serious situation they'd been called to handle. "Stevens, what's the situation here?" Rodriguez asked, glancing at the Johnson family standing peacefully in their own driveway. "Got a call about burglary in progress," Stevens replied with confidence. "These people claim they live here, but they're acting suspicious and refusing to cooperate." David felt his patience wearing thin. "Officer Rodriguez, we're not refusing to cooperate. We've been trying to show identification since your colleague arrived, but he won't let us." "That's not true," Stevens interjected quickly. "They've been argumentative from the start." Lisa stepped forward, her voice clear and professional. "Officers, I'm Dr. Lisa Johnson. This is my husband David, and these are our children. We live at this address. We've lived here for 3 years. We can prove everything, if you'll just allow us to get our documents." Officer Kim looked around the property, taking in the children's toys, the well-maintained garden, the basketball hoop, and the family's car in the driveway. Nothing looked like a crime scene. "Stevens," Kim said quietly, "maybe we should let them show some ID and sort this out." But Stevens wasn't backing down. "I know what I saw when I arrived. They were acting suspicious, going through the property like they were casing the place. We were fixing our fence," Tommy said in a small voice, pointing to the tools still lying on the ground where his father had dropped them. David felt a surge of pride at his son's courage, but also worry about how this was affecting both his children. By now, nearly the entire block had come out to watch. Mrs. Chen was standing in her driveway with her arms crossed, clearly upset. The Patel family was recording with their phones. Even old Mr. Henley from 3 houses down had walked over to see what was happening. "This is embarrassing," Lisa whispered to David. "Our own neighbors are watching us get treated like criminals." Stevens seemed to enjoy the attention. "I'm going to need all of you to move to the sidewalk while we investigate the property." "You want us to move to the sidewalk?" David asked, hardly believing what he was hearing. "From our own property." "Sir, I'm not going to ask again." Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Stevens, don't you think we should verify their story first? Let them show some identification?" "They could have fake IDs," Stevens replied dismissively. "I've seen it before. Burglars come prepared these days." Lisa had heard enough. "Fake IDs? Officer, I work at Children's Hospital. My husband teaches at Westfield High. Our children go to school here. Our mail is delivered here. Our neighbors know us. What kind of elaborate burglary involves bringing children and garden tools?" Several neighbors were now moving closer, clearly taking the family's side. Mrs. Chen called out, "Officers, the Johnson family lives there. They've been our neighbors for years." Stevens turned toward the growing crowd. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. This is police business," but more voices joined in. "They definitely live there," said Mr. Patel. "We've had barbecues together." "Those are their kids," added another neighbor. "Maya plays with my daughter every weekend. Stevens was becoming more agitated as his authority was questioned by multiple witnesses. I don't care what you people think you know. I'm conducting an official investigation based on a legitimate complaint. Officer Kim pulled Stevens aside for a quiet conversation, but David could see Stevens shaking his head stubbornly. Maya had started crying, overwhelmed by the chaos and confusion. Lisa knelt down and pulled her daughter close, trying to comfort her while maintaining her own composure. Mommy, why won't the policeman believe us? Maya asked through her tears. I don't know, sweetheart, Lisa whispered back, her own voice starting to crack. David felt anger building in his chest, but he knew he had to stay calm. Any show of emotion could make things worse, especially with Stevens looking for reasons to escalate the situation. Officer Rodriguez, David said, addressing the more reasonable-seeming officer, please. We just want to go into our home and get our mortgage papers, our mail, our family photos. Anything that will prove we belong here. Rodriguez nodded. That sounds reasonable. Absolutely not, Stevens interrupted. Nobody goes into that house until we've secured the scene and conducted a proper investigation. Investigation of what? Lisa demanded, standing up. Our garden? Our children's toys? The family photos on our front porch? Ma'am, your hostile attitude is not helping this situation. Hostile? Lisa's voice rose. I'm standing in my own driveway being called a burglar in front of my children and neighbors. How exactly should I react? David gently touched his wife's arm, trying to keep everyone calm. But he understood her frustration completely. This was beyond humiliating. It was devastating. Tommy moved closer to his parents. Dad, are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong? No, son, David said firmly. We didn't do anything wrong. Stevens overheard. Well, we'll see about that. Officer Kim, I want you to check around back for signs of forced entry. Kim looked reluctant but followed orders, walking toward the backyard where Maya's treasure stones still sat in their neat line on the porch steps. The crowd of neighbors was growing larger, and many were now openly expressing their support for the family. Some were recording everything on their phones while others were making calls, presumably to other neighbors or family members. This is wrong, Mrs. Chen said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Those officers should be ashamed of themselves. Stevens spun around. Ma'am, if you don't step back and stop interfering with police business, I'll arrest you for obstruction. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. The situation was spiraling completely out of control, and David realized that no amount of patience or cooperation was going to fix this. Stevens had made up his mind, and he was determined to prove himself right no matter what evidence suggested otherwise. David looked at his family, his crying daughter, his confused son, his frustrated wife, and felt something break inside him. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about every family who had ever been treated this way. Every parent who had to explain to their children why being polite and respectful sometimes wasn't enough. Stevens had clearly made his decision. Despite the growing protest from neighbors and the lack of any evidence supporting his claims, he was doubling down on his position. All right, that's enough, Stevens announced. I'm ordering all of you to move away from this property immediately. This is now an active crime scene. David felt the blood drain from his face. Crime scene? Officer, please, you have to listen to reason. Check our identification. Call our employers. Do something to verify who we are before this goes any further. The time for talking is over, Stevens replied coldly. You people have had plenty of chances to cooperate, and instead you've chosen to be difficult. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward hesitantly. Stevens, maybe we should… Rodriguez, I'm the senior officer here, and I'm making the call. We're removing these individuals from the premises until we can conduct a thorough investigation. Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. Remove us? This is our home. Our children live here. Our belongings are inside. Ma'am, you need to gather your family and move to the sidewalk immediately, or I'll be forced to arrest you for trespassing. Trespassing. On their own property. David felt like he was living in some kind of nightmare. Maya was now sobbing uncontrollably, clinging to her mother's leg. Tommy stood frozen, unable to process what was happening to his family. The neighbors were becoming more vocal in their protests, but Stevens ignored them all. This is insane, Mrs. Chen called out. I'm calling the mayor's office. This is completely wrong. Stevens walked over to the family's belongings scattered around the driveway, David's tools, Lisa's gardening basket, Maya's treasure stones. We'll need to catalog all of this as potential evidence. Evidence of what? David asked desperately. Evidence that we live here? Evidence that our children play in this yard? Evidence that my wife gardens and I fix things around the house? But Stevens was already picking up Lisa's medical bag, which she'd left on the porch when the situation began. Whose bag is this? It's mine, Lisa said. I'm a doctor. Those are my medical supplies. Stevens opened the bag and began going through its contents, handling Lisa's expensive medical equipment with no care at all. Anyone could get their hands on medical supplies, he said dismissively. Lisa watched in horror as he rifled through her stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, and emergency medications. Please be careful with those. Some of that equipment is very delicate and expensive. You should have thought about that before you brought stolen property to a crime scene. David had to physically restrain himself from intervening. Watching a stranger manhandle his wife's professional tools was almost unbearable, but he knew that any aggressive move would only make things worse for his family. Officer Kim returned from the backyard looking troubled. Stevens, I didn't find any signs of forced entry. Everything looks normal back there. There's a vegetable garden, children's play equipment, family stuff. Stevens barely glanced up from Lisa's medical bag. They could have had keys. Could be inside accomplices. We need to secure the entire property. Kim exchanged a look with Rodriguez. Both officers were clearly uncomfortable with how the situation was developing, but Stevens was their superior on scene. Please, David tried one more time. Just let us show you our driver's licenses. Our names are on the deed. Our mail is right there in the mailbox. Our children's school pictures are hanging on the wall inside. How much proof do you need? Driver's licenses can be faked, Stevens replied automatically. House break-ins often involve people who research the real owners first. It was like talking to a wall. No amount of logic or evidence was going to change Stevens's mind. Tommy suddenly spoke up, his young voice shaking with emotion. Officer, this is our house. My room is upstairs. I have basketball trophies on my shelf and a poster of LeBron James on my wall. Maya has a dollhouse in her room that Grandma gave her for Christmas. Please just look. Stevens barely glanced at the boy. Kids can be coached to say anything. That comment pushed Lisa over the edge. Coached? You think we coached our children to lie about where they live? Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? Ma'am, your continued resistance is making this worse for everyone. I'm ordering you one final time to move away from this property. David looked around at his neighbors, his friends, people who had shared barbecues and birthday parties with his family. They were all watching in shock and disbelief, but they were also documenting everything. Dad, Tommy whispered. What are we going to do? David knelt down and put his arms around both his children. We're going to stay calm, and we're going to get through this together. Sometimes people make mistakes, and we have to be patient while they figure out the truth. But even as he said the words, David wasn't sure he believed them anymore. This didn't feel like a mistake. This felt like something much worse. Stevens had moved on to examining David's teaching materials, which were visible through the open garage door. Boxes of math worksheets, a calculator, gradebooks from the previous school year. Anyone could get their hands on school supplies, Stevens muttered, poking through the boxes. Mrs. Chen couldn't contain herself any longer. This is absolutely ridiculous. I'm recording everything, and I'm sending it to every news station in the city. This family has lived here for 3 years. They host the neighborhood block party every summer. Their daughter sells Girl Scout cookies door to door. What kind of long-term burglary plan involves Girl Scout cookies? Other neighbors joined in with their own testimonials, but Stevens dismissed them all. In his mind, he had stumbled onto some kind of elaborate scheme, and no amount of community support was going to convince him otherwise. David realized with growing dread that this situation was not going to be resolved through reasonable conversation. Stevens had invested too much of his authority in being right, and admitting he was wrong would mean admitting he had terrorized an innocent family in front of dozens of witnesses. The question now was how far Stevens was willing to take this before someone with more authority intervened. David looked at his crying children and his frustrated wife and wondered how much more his family could endure. Just as Stevens was preparing to formally escort the family off their own property, the sound of another vehicle pulling up made everyone turn their heads. A black sedan with official city plates came to a stop behind the police cars, and Mayor Rebecca Martinez stepped out. Mayor Martinez had been driving to the community center for a scheduled youth sports event when she noticed the unusual commotion on Maple Street. As someone who made it her business to know what was happening in every neighborhood of her city, she couldn't ignore the sight of multiple police cars and a crowd of agitated residents. What she saw as she approached made her blood boil. "What in the world is going on here?" the mayor demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. Stevens looked up from David's teaching materials, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected arrival of the city's highest elected official. "Mayor Martinez, we're conducting a police investigation. Everything is under control." Under control? Mayor Martinez looked around at the scene. A family with children being treated like criminals, neighbors recording and protesting, police officers going through personal belongings scattered across a driveway. "This doesn't look under control to me, Officer Stevens." David felt a surge of hope. He recognized Mayor Martinez from community events and local news coverage. She had a reputation for being fair-minded and accessible to residents. "Mayor Martinez," David called out, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. This is our home. We've lived here for 3 years, but Officer Stevens received some kind of false report and won't listen to any evidence." The mayor walked over to the family, her expression growing more concerned as she took in the children's tear-stained faces and the parents' obvious distress. "Dr. and Mr. Johnson, right?" she said, surprising everyone. "You organized the neighborhood cleanup last spring, and your daughter Maya sells the best Girl Scout cookies in the city." Lisa nearly cried with relief. Yes, that's us." "You remember us." Stevens stepped forward aggressively. "Mayor, I appreciate your concern, but this is an active police investigation. I'm going to have to ask you to step back and let us do our job." Mayor Martinez turned to face Stevens with a look that could have frozen fire. She had been mayor for 8 years and had dealt with difficult police situations before, but she had never seen anything quite this outrageous. "Officer Stevens, I know this family personally. Dr. Johnson treated my nephew when he broke his arm last year. Mr. Johnson tutored my friend's daughter in mathematics. These people are pillars of this community." "Anyone can claim to know anyone," Stevens replied stubbornly. "I have to base my investigation on facts, not on who says they know who." Mayor Martinez couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Facts? What facts? What evidence of wrongdoing have you found here?" Stevens gestured toward the scattered belongings. "They were acting suspiciously when I arrived, claiming to live here without proper verification." "Without proper verification?" The mayor's voice rose. "Officer, have you checked their identification? Have you verified the property records? Have you spoken to any of these neighbors who are telling you they've known this family for years?" Rodriguez and Kim exchanged glances. They had been hoping someone with authority would intervene, and now that someone was here. "Mayor," Rodriguez spoke up carefully, "we haven't actually seen any identification yet." Officer Stevens felt the situation was too suspicious. Too suspicious. Mayor Martinez interrupted. "A family doing yard work on a Saturday morning in their own neighborhood is too suspicious?" Tommy had stopped crying and was watching the mayor with fascination. In his 12 years, he had never seen an adult stand up to a police officer like this. Maya was still clinging to her mother, but she was also peeking out to see what would happen next. Mrs. Chen called out from the crowd, "Mayor Martinez, we've been trying to tell them that the Johnson family lives here. But Officer Stevens won't listen to any of us." The mayor looked around at the assembled neighbors, many of whom she recognized from various community events over the years. These were not random strangers, these were voters, taxpayers, and community members whose opinions mattered. "Officer Stevens," Mayor Martinez said in a tone that brooked no argument, "I want you to immediately allow this family to show their identification and prove their residency. And I want you to do it with the respect and courtesy that every citizen of this city deserves." Stevens' face was turning red with anger and embarrassment. Being corrected by the mayor in front of civilians was not something his ego could easily handle. "Mayor, with all due respect, I don't take orders from civilian officials during active police operations." The crowd gasped at Stevens' blatant disrespect toward their elected leader. Mayor Martinez had been patient up to this point, but that comment crossed a line. "Officer Stevens, let me be very clear about something. I may be a civilian, but I am the civilian who signs the police department's budget. I am the civilian who appoints the police chief. And I am the civilian who will be reviewing this entire incident with your superiors on Monday morning." The mayor pulled out her phone and began recording. Now I am officially requesting that you allow the Johnson family to present identification and resolve this matter immediately. Are you going to comply with that request, or do I need to call Chief Williams right now?" Stevens looked around desperately. The crowd was entirely against him. His fellow officers were clearly uncomfortable with his handling of the situation, and now the mayor was personally intervening. But his pride wouldn't let him back down gracefully. "I still think this situation requires further investigation," he said weakly. David stepped forward, sensing an opportunity. "Mayor Martinez, we would be happy to show you our identification, our mortgage documents, our mail, anything you need to verify that this is our home." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Johnson," the mayor replied. "I know who you are and I know where you live, but Officer Stevens apparently needs convincing." She turned back to Stevens with a look of complete authority. "Officer, you have exactly 60 seconds to either begin treating this family with the respect they deserve, or I'm calling your chief and having you removed from this scene." "What's it going to be?" For the first time since the ordeal began, David felt like justice might actually prevail. The mayor's intervention had completely changed the dynamic, and even Stevens seemed to realize that his position was no longer defensible. But David also knew that wounded pride could be dangerous, and Stevens didn't look like someone who was going to give up easily. Mayor Martinez's 60-second countdown hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Stevens looked around at the crowd, at his fellow officers, at the family he had been tormenting, and finally at the mayor, who was clearly not bluffing about her authority. "Fine," Stevens said through gritted teeth. "Let's see some identification." David almost laughed at the absurdity. After an hour of terror and humiliation, it was going to come down to something as simple as showing a driver's license, something he had been trying to do from the very beginning. "Thank you," David said calmly, reaching slowly for his wallet. Even now, he was careful not to make any sudden movements that Stevens could interpret as threatening. Lisa did the same, pulling out her purse and retrieving her identification. Both handed their licenses to Mayor Martinez, who examined them carefully and then read the addresses aloud. "Gum 47 Maple Street," the mayor announced clearly. "The exact address where we're currently standing." Stevens snatched the licenses from the mayor's hands, studying them with exaggerated intensity, as if searching for signs of forgery. "Anyone can get fake IDs," he muttered, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "Officer Stevens," Mayor Martinez said with dangerous calm, "are you seriously suggesting that this family has fake identification? Fake mortgage documents, fake neighbors, fake children attending local schools, and fake community involvement going back 3 years, all as part of some elaborate burglary scheme?" When she put it like that, even Stevens seemed to realize how ridiculous his position had become. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Stevens, maybe we should check the property records," Rodriguez suggested gently. "Dispatch can verify ownership in about 30 seconds. Stevens knew he was cornered, but his pride was preventing him from backing down gracefully. "Fine. Rodriguez, call it in." While Rodriguez radioed dispatch, Mayor Martinez knelt down to talk to Maya and Tommy, who had been watching the adult confrontation with wide eyes. "I'm sorry this happened to you both," she said softly. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, and unfortunately, children have to see things that don't make sense." Maya sniffled. "Why didn't the policeman believe us when we said this was our house?" Mayor Martinez glanced up at Stevens, who was pretending not to listen. "That's a very good question, sweetheart. Sometimes people make judgments before they have all the facts." "Dispatch confirms," Rodriguez announced. "Property is owned by David and Lisa Johnson, purchased 3 years ago. Mortgage is current, no liens or legal issues." The mayor stood up and faced Stevens directly. "Well, officer, are you satisfied now?" Stevens' face was a mask of frustration and embarrassment. He had been completely wrong, and everyone knew it. But instead of apologizing or showing any remorse, he doubled down on his defensive position. "Look, I responded to a call about suspicious activity. I was just doing my job." "What call?" Mayor Martinez demanded. "Who called in this complaint?" Stevens hesitated, and in that hesitation, David realized something important. "There was no call, was there?" David said quietly. "You saw a black family in this neighborhood and decided we didn't belong here. That's not—" Stevens started to protest, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. Mayor Martinez pulled out her phone. "Chief Williams? It's Rebecca Martinez. I need you to come to 1247 Maple Street immediately. We have a situation here that requires your personal attention." Stevens went pale. Having the police chief come to review his handling of a situation was never good. But having the mayor personally request the chief's presence was a career-threatening development. "Mayor, I think we can resolve this without involving the chief," Stevens said desperately. "Oh, we're absolutely involving the chief," Mayor Martinez replied, "and the city attorney, and possibly the FBI, depending on what we find when we review your body camera footage and radio calls." Lisa stepped forward. "Mayor Martinez, we appreciate your intervention, but we just want this to end. We want to go inside our house and try to help our children process what just happened." The mayor nodded understandingly. "Of course, Dr. Johnson, but this can't just end here. What happened to your family today was wrong, and there have to be consequences, or it will happen again to someone else." Mrs. Chen called out from the crowd. "Mayor, we all saw everything. This officer treated them terribly from the very beginning." Other neighbors joined in, sharing what they had witnessed. The Patel family had recorded much of the interaction. Mr. Henley had been taking notes. The community was rallying around the Johnson family in a way that made David feel both grateful and heartbroken. Officer Kim approached David quietly. "Sir, I want to apologize for my role in this. We should have insisted on seeing identification right away." David appreciated the gesture, but his focus was on his children, who had been traumatized by watching their parents treated like criminals in their own driveway. "Tommy, Maya," David called gently. "Let's go inside and get cleaned up. We'll figure everything else out later." Stevens made one last desperate attempt to save face. "I was just responding to what appeared to be suspicious activity." "Any officer would have done the same thing." Mayor Martinez fixed him with a withering stare. "Officer Stevens, I've been mayor of this city for 8 years. I've seen how good police officers handle situations like this. They ask questions. They gather information. They treat citizens with respect. They don't terrorize families based on assumptions." The sound of another police car approaching signaled the arrival of Chief Williams. David felt a mix of relief and exhaustion as he realized this ordeal was finally coming to an end. But he also knew that the real consequences, for Stevens, for the police department, and for his family's sense of security in their own home, were just beginning. Stevens straightened his uniform and tried to compose himself for his superior's arrival, but everyone present could see that his authority had been completely undermined. The confident officer who had arrived an hour earlier was gone, replaced by someone who was about to face serious questions about his judgment and conduct. David put his arms around his wife and children, grateful for Mayor Martinez's intervention, but also aware that no amount of vindication could erase the trauma his family had just experienced in their own driveway. Chief Patricia Williams arrived on scene like a storm cloud, her expression growing darker with each detail she observed. The scattered belongings, the crowd of upset neighbors, the obviously distressed family, and Mayor Martinez's presence all told a story that made her stomach sink. "Mayor Martinez," Chief Williams said respectfully, "what exactly happened here?" "Chief, I arrived to find Officer Stevens treating the Johnson family like criminals in their own driveway, refusing to check their identification, and dismissing the testimony of multiple neighbors who vouched for them." Chief Williams looked at Stevens, who was standing stiffly at attention but sweating profusely. "Officer Stevens, report." "Chief, I responded to a call about suspicious activity and found these individuals on the property. They were acting evasively and—" "Stop." Chief Williams held up her hand. "What call? Show me the dispatch record." Stevens fumbled with his radio, knowing full well that no such record existed. "The call came in through. It was reported to me directly." "By whom?" the chief demanded. Stevens' silence was answer enough. Chief Williams pulled out her phone and called dispatch herself. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a grim expression. "Dispatch has no record of any call to this address today. No burglary reports, no suspicious activity reports, nothing." The crowd of neighbors murmured angrily. David felt vindicated but also disturbed by the confirmation that Stevens had acted entirely on his own prejudices. "Officer Stevens," Chief Williams continued, "are you telling me that you initiated this entire incident without any formal complaint or legitimate cause?" Stevens looked desperate. "Chief, I was patrolling the neighborhood and observed behavior that seemed suspicious to my trained eye." "Your trained eye saw a family doing yard work and decided they were criminals?" Mayor Martinez interrupted. Chief Williams examined the scene more carefully, taking in the children's toys, the gardening tools, the basketball hoop, the well-maintained property. Officer Stevens explained to me what exactly appeared suspicious about this situation. Stevens couldn't answer without revealing his racial bias, so he remained silent. Dr. Lisa stepped forward. "Chief Williams, your officer refused to look at our identification, dismissed our neighbors' testimonies, went through our personal belongings without cause, and threatened to arrest us for trespassing on our own property." Chief Williams nodded gravely. "Dr. Johnson, on behalf of the entire police department, I want to apologize for what you and your family have endured today. This is not how we train our officers to serve the community." Tommy spoke up in his young voice. "Chief, why did Officer Stevens think we were bad people? We were just fixing our fence." The chief knelt down to Tommy's level, her stern expression softening. "You're not bad people, son. Sometimes adults make very poor decisions, and unfortunately, children have to see the consequences." She stood and faced Stevens directly. "Officer Stevens, you are immediately suspended pending a full internal investigation. I want your badge and weapon now." Stevens's face went white. "Chief, please, You were just what? Terrorizing a family based on your personal biases? Ignoring proper procedures? Refusing to follow basic investigative protocols?" The chief's voice carried across the entire crowd. "Furthermore, this incident will be referred to Internal Affairs, the District Attorney's Office, and the FBI's Civil Rights Division for potential federal charges." Mayor Martinez nodded approvingly. "Chief, I also want a complete review of the department's training procedures and bias prevention protocols. This cannot happen again." "Absolutely, Mayor. We'll be implementing immediate reforms." Stevens slowly removed his badge and service weapon, his career effectively ending in the same driveway where he had caused so much pain. Officer Rodriguez and Kim watched silently, both understanding that they would face questioning about their own roles in the incident. Mrs. Chen called out from the crowd, "Chief Williams, we recorded everything. This family was treated disgracefully. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Those recordings will be valuable evidence in our investigation." David felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice was being served, but the damage to his family's sense of security couldn't be undone by Stevens' punishment. "Chief," David said, "we appreciate the accountability, but our main concern is helping our children understand what happened here today." Chief Williams nodded. "Mr. Johnson, the department will provide counseling resources for your family if you'd like. We also want to work with you on any community healing efforts you feel would be appropriate." Mayor Martinez added, "The city will be reviewing our police oversight procedures and community relations programs. What happened here today was unacceptable, and we're going to make changes to ensure it doesn't happen again." Lisa looked at her children, who were still processing the adult world's complexities. "Maya, Tommy, what you saw today was wrong. But you also saw how good people, our neighbors, the mayor, the police chief, stood up for what was right." Maya nodded solemnly. "The nice policemen were different from the mean policemen." "That's right, sweetheart," Lisa said. "Most police officers are good people who want to help and protect families like ours." Chief Williams overheard and approached the children again. "Maya, your mom is absolutely right. Officer Stevens forgot the most important part of being a police officer, treating everyone with respect and kindness." Tommy looked up at the chief. "Will you make sure other families don't have to go through this?" "I promise you, son. We're going to do everything we can to make sure this never happens again." As Stevens was escorted away by Rodriguez and Kim, the crowd of neighbors began to disperse, many stopping to offer support to the Johnson family. Mr. Patel approached David. "We're planning a neighborhood barbecue next weekend to show support for your family. We hope you'll be the guests of honor." David smiled for the first time all day. "We'd like that very much." Mayor Martinez prepared to leave but stopped to speak with the family privately. "I want you to know that the city stands behind you completely. If you need anything, counseling, legal support, anything, please call my office directly." As the official vehicles pulled away and the neighborhood returned to its Saturday afternoon quiet, the Johnson family stood in their driveway surrounded by the belongings that had been scattered hours earlier. The damage wasn't just to their property, it was to their children's innocence and their own sense of safety. But they had also witnessed something powerful. A community coming together to defend what was right, and leaders willing to hold wrongdoers accountable. The healing process would take time, but justice had been served. 3 months later, David stood in the same driveway where his family's world had been turned upside down. But everything felt different now. The morning sun painted the same golden light across their property, but the peace they had once taken for granted had been replaced by a deeper understanding of both vulnerability and strength. Stevens had been officially terminated from the police force and was facing federal civil rights charges. The investigation had revealed a pattern of biased behavior in his record that had been overlooked for too long. His body camera footage from that day, which he had conveniently forgotten to activate, became a key piece of evidence in the broader reforms that followed. Maya came running from the backyard, just as she had on that terrible Saturday, but now her treasure hunt had expanded. She was collecting stones not just for her own museum, but for a garden memorial that the neighborhood had created to honor families who had faced injustice. "Daddy, look!" Maya held up a smooth white stone with natural veins running through it. "Mrs. Chen says this one looks like it has rivers in it." David smiled and examined his daughter's latest find. The trauma hadn't disappeared. Maya still had nightmares sometimes, and Tommy had become more cautious around authority figures. But the children were healing with the resilience that kids somehow managed to find. Lisa emerged from the house carrying a tray of lemonade. She was preparing for the neighborhood's monthly community meeting, which had become a regular event since the incident. What had started as a show of support for the Johnson family had evolved into an ongoing dialogue about police reform and community relations. "The mayor should be here soon," Lisa announced. She wanted to update everyone on the new police training programs. Chief Williams had been true to her word. The police department had implemented comprehensive bias training, community oversight programs, and new protocols requiring multiple officers to verify complaints before taking action. Rodriguez and Kim had both received additional training and were now part of a community outreach team. Tommy jogged over from where he'd been shooting basketball with neighborhood kids who had become his closest friends since the incident. The shared experience had brought the community together in unexpected ways. "Dad, Officer Martinez wants to know if she can join our basketball game later," Tommy said, referring to one of the new community liaison officers who regularly visited the neighborhood. David nodded. The department's new approach emphasized relationship building rather than enforcement-only interactions. It was working. Tommy and Maya now saw police officers as community helpers rather than threats, though it had taken time and patience to rebuild that trust. Mrs. Chen walked over from her yard, carrying a folder full of updates from the various reform committees that had formed in the wake of the incident. She had become an unlikely activist, using her retirement to advocate for police accountability and community justice. "David, Lisa, you should see the latest numbers," Mrs. Chen said excitedly. "Bias complaints are down 60% citywide since the new training started, and community trust scores are at their highest level in 5 years. Lisa smiled at her neighbor's enthusiasm. Mrs. Chen had become not just a friend but a co-founder of the Willowbrook Justice Initiative, which was now being replicated in other cities across the state. The sound of a familiar car pulling up made everyone turn. Mayor Martinez stepped out carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone bearing good news. "Johnson family," the mayor called out warmly. "I have updates you're going to want to hear." Over the past 3 months, Mayor Martinez had become more than just a political figure to the family. She had become a friend and ally who checked in regularly on their recovery and the broader reform efforts. "The Department of Justice just approved our grant application," Mayor Martinez announced. "We're getting federal funding for a comprehensive police reform program that will serve as a model for other cities." David felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. Their family's trauma had become a catalyst for change that would help protect other families, but the cost had been enormous. "There's more," the mayor continued. "Stevens pled guilty to federal civil rights violations this morning. He'll serve 18 months in federal prison and will never be eligible to work in law enforcement again." The neighborhood had gathered around to hear the update, and a quiet cheer went up from the crowd. Justice had been served, but everyone understood that the real victory was in the changes that would prevent future incidents. Tommy looked up at his father. "Dad, does this mean other kids won't have to go through what we did?" David knelt down and put his arms around both his children. That's exactly what it means, son. Sometimes bad things happen, but when good people work together, they can make sure those bad things help create something better. Maya nodded seriously. Like how my treasure stones are prettier when I arrange them together. Exactly like that, sweetheart. As the community meeting began in their backyard, David looked around at the faces that had become so important to his family's healing. Neighbors who had stood up for them, officials who had fought for justice, children who had learned about courage and community. The new patio furniture they had been expecting on that terrible morning finally sat where it was supposed to, hosting conversations about justice and reform rather than casual barbecues. But there was joy too, birthday parties and graduation celebrations and ordinary moments that made their house feel like home again. Lisa caught David's eye and smiled. They had been through something that no family should have to endure, but they had also witnessed the power of a community coming together for what was right. Officer Martinez arrived for the basketball game, and Tommy ran off to join his friends and the officer who had become a positive role model. Maya continued her treasure hunt, adding to a collection that now symbolized resilience rather than innocence. David sat down on his porch steps, the same steps where his daughter had arranged her first treasure stones on that perfect morning months ago. The morning sun still painted everything golden, but now that light illuminated a community that had learned to protect its own and fight for justice. The healing wasn't complete, it might never be complete, but the Johnson family had reclaimed their home, their security, and their faith in the possibility that good people could make bad situations better. Their story had become part of something larger, a movement toward justice, accountability, and the radical idea that every family deserved to feel safe in their own driveway. As Mayor Martinez began discussing the latest reform initiatives with the assembled neighbors, David felt something he hadn't experienced since that terrible Saturday morning: genuine hope for the future.